Same old game over.
Johnny. You're gonna need a bigger boat. So serious. Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 127 for July 26th, 2015, and I am Brendan Cassidy.
And I'm phenomenal, JD Duran.
How did I not think of that?
I don't know.
Way too perfect. Oh, I'm disappointed in myself. But anyway, hopefully this show is phenomenal, and thank you everyone for joining this week. We do have an uppercut of a show is what I was going to say, but I think I might want to say we've got a phenomenal show instead, because I hope it's going to be a phenomenal show. I think it's going to be pretty. I think it's going to be a pretty interesting one. But JD, first off, did you have a phenomenal week? How you been doing?
I did have a phenomenal week. Things are going really well. Having some busy stuff with the wife and getting ready for the kid to get here. I will say, though, as good as a week that I had, and I do want to talk about some of that real fast, but I do want to say huge condolences to the victims and the families of this theater shooting in Louisiana. That is incredibly tragic, and of course now that's 2 times that's happened in like the last 4 or 5 years, I guess. So
2 times too many. I mean,
2 times too many. So and especially in an arena that we are in all the time and something we love to do, we certainly don't want to have that kind of fear in our minds as we go to watch movies and escape from reality and embrace the magic that is film. I mean, we absolutely love it. So I hate hearing stories like that. But of course, our thoughts and prayers are to everyone involved in that. That was just horrific. So
yeah, absolutely. And I'll echo that as well. In fact, I kind of wanted to bring that up as well. So I appreciate you bringing it up first. But I guess that this happened during a screening of Trainwreck, and Amy Schumer has also expressed her condolences as well. And I wanted to make note of that as well. That I'm glad, you know, the stars out there acknowledging this as well, and because they take it seriously just as much as us as movie fans do, and it's a really serious matter. And I respect that out of them too, that they're going to make note about it.
Absolutely. So, and I guess speaking of Trainwreck and kind of the turn gears a little bit to something a little bit
to the
happier and more fun. Yes, on our extra film, we did have an awesome conversation of Trainwreck and Mr. Holmes. That was great. So if you guys haven't had a chance to listen to that, definitely go check it out.
Absolutely. And I wasn't on the episode for Mr. Holmes specifically, but I was there with you and your lovely wife for Trainwreck, and I was very surprised by that film, just to say the least. As not much of an Amy Schumer fan, I was won over.
Me too.
I was won over. And you were joined by Anna from Defiant Success for Mr. Holmes, and you guys had a really good discussion as well.
Yeah,
a film that is still on my list to see.
Yeah,
I still got to
go check it out. Yeah. And the last thing I want to mention real fast before we bring on this week's guest is Geek Scholars Movie News. This last week released their 200th episode, and I was very honored to host that for them. So if you haven't heard that already, definitely go and check that out as well. It was a blast, and definitely a huge congrats to those guys as well.
Absolutely. Definitely go check that out and listen to our good friend JD here kind of moderate this thing. And it was very interesting to hear him in essentially in the director's chair for this.
I know. It was a lot of fun, yes.
Yeah. But anyway, let's continue on. We want to bring up our this week's guest for our show, our awesome guest this week. We have Steve from Wasted the Series. Steve, thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you for having me here, coming in with a right, but knocking out with the left.
Continuing with the jabs. I really like it. So we normally have guests from other podcasts and things like that. But Steve, you're a bit of a different case. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Wasted the Series and what you guys do and where we can find you guys on the internet?
Sure. I'm one of the writers, co-producers, and one of the main actors for Wasted. Wasted is a zombie action geek stoner comedy. It's about 4 friends, and they have their high adventures in the zombie apocalypse, fighting monsters, mutants, gangs, and anything they come across in their paths to getting more supplies and surviving in the wasted land, I should say. It's we made a short film around 3 years ago about the concept of wasted, and last year, or this year I should say, there's an online competition called Cinecoup. And I'm based out of Toronto. It's for Canadian filmmakers, but it was open to voters all across the world. And it's an online competition, pretty much like American Idol, in where a bunch of filmmakers come together, put their projects up, and people vote in to see which projects go further and further, where they can get $1 million in production funds. And Wasted was one of them. And we got pretty far. We gained a lot of exposure and everything. But we didn't make it all the way. But in the end result is that, as I said, is about getting the exposure. Meaning, what we do, we're given 12 weeks in this competition. And pretty much what a film like, let's say, Southpaw or even Pixels or anything, even the big ones like Marvel's Ant-Man, they spend a lot of money in marketing. And just getting the word out, right? So that's what we had to do in 12 weeks. But so with the advent of social media and many other things, and even straightforward letters and going out into the street and talking to people, you're supposed to get the word out about what your concept is and gain followers and gain fans about it. So that way, whichever gets picked, at least there's an audience. You're building your audience through that. So that's when we get a good audience, and also interacting with you guys over films and everything. Come check us out and what's so and so. So, as I mentioned, we didn't go all the way, but yet we gained a following, and now the original plan we're sticking to is putting our short film into many festivals, getting a good buzz around that, maybe attracting investors or producers, financiers, and hopefully building a series from it, building a film from it, or even an animated series from it. So if you want more information, just go to Facebook at facebook.com/wastedseries, and follow us on Twitter at wastedtheshow. If you find the skull and cross blunts, that is us. And that's the only one.
All right. Make it easy for us.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's really awesome, man, and we're glad to have you on the show for, a different kind of guest. And we're also glad that we're going to help you kind of push some of the marketing side by you being here. We appreciate that as well. And I also just want to mention that, before the show started here, I did get some time to check out at least portions of your short film, and I got to say, I was having a riot watching it. It's really good stuff, man. There was one scene that I really took away from, where I guess some of you guys were securing a house with like wooden blocks to prevent anything from getting in. But needless to say, they did it all outside. They couldn't get into the building themselves.
Hilarious.
That is brilliant. That's brilliant.
And that's one of the things. That's one of the things with Wasted is the concept is that we acknowledge zombie culture, in that we're growing up. We know about zombie films and zombie stories and video games and everything. We take a lot of inspiration from Resident Evil. I mean, let's be honest. Like, sometimes you gotta change up the zombie thing after all. Even Resident Evil changed it up.
Yeah, in their own way.
Yeah.
And that's a really good way to looking at it.
Yeah, but the thing is that you might know everything about zombies and what to do and how to survive, but do you do it well? So that's where the ideas come from. That's where
it's very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, it's very clever, and I really like that. I like that self-awareness. I think that's really interesting about that. But yeah, I'll echo that again to everyone listening. Definitely go check these guys out. I think you're gonna have a good time as much as myself and JD watching.
Absolutely.
But anyway, we appreciate you being on the show, man. Looking forward to this discussion. We're glad to have you here. But anyway, for this week's show, we are going to be reviewing the latest boxing sports film, Southpaw, the latest attempt by Jake Gyllenhaal to make up for some lost Oscars. So we'll see if he actually makes cut this time around. And then going off of that, we're going to be going over our top 3 favorite sports movie scenes or moments, which I'm looking forward to, as there are many out there. And I would be damned if we have any repetition on this list. I'm really looking forward to a lot of differences that we can bring. And then for our third segment, originally we were going to do a segment of What the Snub, and we're going to have a focus on Jake Gyllenhaal, because he's had a heck of a career. But the thing is, we've talked a lot about his snub for Nightcrawler last year, which kind of would have been the focus of this conversation. So rather than beating an already decaying dead horse, we decided let's take a look at another film. And since a film like Pixels is getting absolutely ripped apart by the critics out there, it may warrant for a good and mindlessly fun conversation. So for our third segment, we're going to be doing kind of a loose review of Pixels, and we'll see if we agree with the critics or if we maybe found some joy out of it. I think there might be a good thing, some good discussion there that I look forward to getting into.
Absolutely.
But with all that said, we've got a lot to talk about, guys. So let's get into it.
And here we go.
With every ounce of my blood, with every breath in my lungs, won't stop until I'm phenomenal. However long it takes, I'll go to whatever lengths. It's gonna make me a monster though. But I'm example would you be?
Unstoppable, unpoppable thought bubbles, untoppable thoughts, fucking juggernaut that'll stomp you in the verse. Obstacles I'm drawn to them when they're going hot. Of some of what I done fought was the worst. Little sissy, who the fuck taught you how to persevere? There ain't no situation that you ever had to respond to that's adverse. Messiest thing you've ever gone through is your purse. Yeah, I don't cry like hell, then I might as well hang it up like a shell. Gotta keep wrong with it evolve, cause you can keep throwing shit at the wall, but you're gonna find that nothing's gonna stick until you apply yourself. Time to slip in that zone till I find myself inside the realm of the unknown and boldly go.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 127. JD, I love you. You're all I care about. The two of us. That's it. That's all that matters.
The more you get hit, the harder you fight. I get it.
I don't want to hear this right now.
Only now you're taking way too many hits before you get off.
Listen to me. This was a good night.
I love you. You are all I care about. The three of us. That's it. That's all that matters. So I'm going to tell you the truth. You're going to be punch drunk in 2 years if you keep this up. Think about her when she graduates. What do you want to look like?
You gotta lay the truth right now. You say don't do it, alright? You say don't do it.
They're all gonna keep you in that Billy the Great bubble, you know? And they'll take their pound of flesh. But baby, when that bubble pops, they're all just gonna scatter like roaches.
All right, Southpaw is directed by Antoine Fuqua and stars Jake Gyllenhaal, Rachel McAdams, Forrest Whitaker, 50 Cent, and a few other people that we'll also talk a little bit about. We'll toss to you first, Steve. What did you think about the movie Southpaw?
I thought it was as a boxing movie, it was pretty good. Gyllenhaal really gave it his all in that.
Mm-hmm.
Now I gotta preface this saying that I saw this. There was an advanced screening 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
They had a premiere in Toronto, so it's not as fresh in my mind. But what I do remember is that Gyllenhaal really gave it his all. And when you see Gyllenhaal, you can also look up seeing clips online of Fuqua making sure Gyllenhaal gets into the role of being a boxer.
Sure.
And with the training. And it comes and it shows through vibrantly on screen. But it kind of follows the same boxing tropes as every other boxing film, and every other sports film. And Fuqua, I like Fuqua and his directions and also his framing. But as a boxing movie, it stands out. It's fine. I enjoyed it for taking that as it is.
All right, sounds good. What about you, JD?
Well, the first thing I want to say is I haven't been a huge fan of Antoine Fuqua and what he's been doing lately.
Right.
So going into this, I was a little apprehensive about it outside of the acting. Of course, the acting was going to be great, but I just haven't been a huge fan of what Fuqua has done over the course of the last 5 years or so. That being said, and this being a boxing movie, I think I am going to get in its corner a little bit. And as you were talking about, Brendan, I mean, it has kind of taken a little bit of a beating from at least half the critics out there. So it has taken some punches, but
yeah,
I think that I can perhaps maybe help doctor this up a little bit. And I'll kind of start off by reading the opening of the review for this film at RogerEbert.com, because I think they pretty much hit the nail on the head, at least as how I feel about this movie. And they say that boxing isn't a sport of surprises. It's not about who can throw the most original punch or dodge in a brand new fashion. Like so many sports, it's about mastering techniques and repeating those moves more fluidly than the competition. And so the familiarity of Antoine Fuqua's Southpaw feels almost appropriate for the subject matter. End quote. And I think that's exactly how I feel about this movie. So similar to what we were discussing in Trainwreck, Brendan, the story here is pretty conventional. It's pretty by the numbers. However, it's infused with a lot of heart that I enjoyed, and it's very well acted. A lot of this really works because of the strength of the performances. Gyllenhaal is as good as ever, as you can imagine. In the ring, he's a fighter. He's amped up with a lot of energy. And outside of the ring, he's more soft-spoken. He's almost weak-minded, and he reacts a lot by his emotions, which is something I want to talk about as well. And Gyllenhaal does a great job of exposing those strengths and weaknesses, and so I was able to buy into his story a lot. So the film's themes are definitely cliche, but I feel like they stand out and make the journey worth the trip because of what Gyllenhaal was doing and what Fuqua was doing in this too. This is a much better directed film, I think, than something like The Equalizer last year or White House Down, especially a few years ago, which was my worst movie of 2013. I absolutely hated that movie.
That movie was
I hated
offensive.
it. So it was offensive, but his direction here I liked because it focused on the heart of the character rather than the convention of the story, and I think that made for a poignant and satisfying experience for me.
Yeah, and I'm kind of glad that you brought up that review specifically from, it was from RogerEbert.com, and I'm not sure who wrote it specifically. I know they've got a lot of new writers since Roger Ebert's passing, and I think Richard Roper may actually be one of them still. But it's interesting you bring that up because I've been known to quote one of Roger Ebert's quotes on our show a few times, in that a movie should really be about how it's about rather than what it's about.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, and I do think that review that you mentioned there does bring up a lot of good points that, boxing movies ever since, like Raging Bull and Rocky and a lot of these classics films out there that have kind of set the formula for a lot of these. It's, it's okay to follow a formula. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just mostly about what you can do internally to keep us engaged. And I think for the most part, I am going to agree with you, JD, that especially by the second half of this film, I was really starting to support the film overall. I do think parts of the first half, though, is a bit, and I don't know if I don't know if it really has to do with Antoine Fuqua's direction or what, but I do think some parts of the first film, though, did come off as a little over the top, a little bit sterile, and sometimes unrealistic. I felt like that there were moments where he was kind of beating us over the head so much with all this tragic stuff to the point that it almost came off as almost Shakespearean for me. That was almost like a Greek tragedy at points, which I think kind of just made the film a little bit sterile in some parts. And then I also found some characters of the film that were a bit hard to sympathize with at first, but by the time the second half of the film rolls around, when we start getting introduced to, Jake Gyllenhaal as Billy Hope and his relationship with Forrest Whitaker's character, things do start coming together better for me. And there are moments that I was ultimately moved by it. And for a film like this, that's really all I needed. That's all I needed. So while I do find some disappointments within the first half of this film, I did find it a little sterile at times. Things do come together, and like you, JD, I was ultimately moved by it, and that's at least all I'm happy to say. I will agree with you as well. I do think from a direction standpoint, this is definitely one of Antoine Fuqua's better films, at least of recent effort. And I think that he definitely has a right focus on character here, and I do think there are some sequences from a technical standpoint that are actually pretty well done, and I was very surprised to see that in a film, with Fuqua at the camera, and I was very surprised and happy to see that. So overall, I liked it more than I had expected because I wasn't really expecting much out of this, but I was pleasantly surprised.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a very from that review. That's a very interesting relation to it, and also, because when you look at a boxing match and say when you know both fighters, if you're a boxing purist and if you follow it, let's say you have two fighters and you know their fighting styles and they go through all 12 rounds and make it to the end. Mm-hmm. Now if you think about it as like say a full story, okay, you start off with the beginning, the two fighters are feeling each other out and see how it goes, then you get the middle, then you get the end.
Yeah.
Now in terms of like all those 12 rounds, it's whether in this fight, does it capture you up until the end to see, okay, who will make it out? Who will be given the decision? Who will win? Or do you lose, or are you disinterested? Do you lose a fight and say, you know what, I don't care. Let's get to the next one and hope for the best. And that's kind of like the way with this film, man. As we all three of us mentioned, yeah, it follows formula, it has some cliches and everything, but ultimately at the end, does it pull you in to where you get that final good ending to where you say, yeah, you know what, I enjoyed this. This is a good film. I don't mind seeing it again. And And yeah, I think we can all agree that Southpaw really delivers in that.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up some really good points, and I think a lot of it hinges for me on two main things, and we kind of mentioned them already. Is well shot. I like the way Fuqua shoots this. Outside of that glorified falling of one of the opponents at the end, that I'm not a huge fan of, but outside of that, I thought it was really well shot for the most part. And then the other thing is the acting is superb, as we've talked about, and you buy into those tropes because of that, and they give you enough that they're able to pull you in. And I will have to kind of slightly disagree with you, Brendan, although I fully understand what you're saying. I actually quite enjoyed the first act. In fact, after hearing about some of the criticisms of this movie and knowing that people weren't loving it, but it wasn't completely being bashed, after the first act, I was completely hooked. I was almost waiting for it to fall into what I thought where the film was going to go in terms of criticism. And by the end, to me, it felt like a lot of the criticism was, well, it's just very conventional. It's very by the numbers. And that I completely agree with, but that first act absolutely worked for me. I loved it, and I think a lot of it has to do with, one, we start out in the ring with Jake Gyllenhaal, and we get some really great boxing sequences there. And another thing that I like about it is we get an established relationship between Jake Gyllenhaal's character and his wife, Maureen, wonderfully played by Rachel McAdams, who is gorgeous in this movie, as always. But she was pivotal to this film working for me. And again, narratively, there's no surprises here. But they do play on some ideas that I do love. I like how that first scene we get with her, she's the last thing that Billy sees before he goes into the ring. There's a huge support that she has for him in this world that he engages in. And that mixes well with the fear that she also shows during the fight. I think it makes other scenes later in the first act stand out emotionally for me. But I felt their chemistry, and I thought it was viscerally well done, and the crystallization of the Marine character, and this is in the trailers, so I'm going to go ahead and say it, even though it is kind of a spoiler, but it's in the trailers that she is shot and killed. And when we get to that moment, it's the capper on the first act. I thought the acting was incredibly robust. It was an intimate and arduous moment that was well shot. I love how Fuqua, he puts the camera right up on their faces, and we don't back out. So we don't really see how everyone else is reacting to them until after the moment is pretty much over with. I love that it's pretty much kept on them two the whole time. And Gyllenhaal, out of his mind, awesome in there. And Rachel McAdams is also very good there too. There's also some good allegorical stuff going on there too that I won't go into, but I found it pretty captivating, mostly because of the performances. So I quite enjoyed the first act, actually.
Yeah, and and when I said like around the halfway point is where it started coming together for me, I guess I should really back up and say it was really this scene where I was slowly starting to care more about it, because up until this point, I had a hard time really sympathizing with anyone, where I guess I saw all of the bad characteristics out of people, and I was kind of questioning whether or not who we're supposed to side with, and if we're and it's hard to really explain without going into too much detail that I don't want to go into yet for those who who haven't seen the film. But I was a little questionable about that. But you're absolutely right about this death scene, which we can talk about because it is absolutely in the trailer.
It's very prevalent, yes.
Yeah, it's very prevalent. And one of the first things I did write down when I was taking notes was that was one of the best death scenes I think I've seen in a long time.
It's good.
Rachel McAdams sells it, and it is harrowing. It is really difficult to watch. And it was at this point where I really started to find the sympathy within Jake Gyllenhaal's character, because up until that point, his behavior during this press conference and some of his other behavioral tropes within the ring, the guy kind of came across as a bit of a, I don't want to say a jerk, because I feel like that's too harsh of a word.
Well, he's a little egotistical, which a lot of that sport is wrapped up in.
It is. And I guess I felt like it was a little bit almost too stylistically egotistical that it started taking me a little bit out of the movie. And maybe that's maybe a bit of a biased criticism, because it's probably a lot of how this world is. I'm not a boxing fan myself. I don't watch the sport, so that could be something I'm a bit ignorant to. But needless to say, it did leave me questioning where the sympathy of this film was supposed to lie. But after that scene did culminate, beautifully, I might add. Well, I guess beautifully is a bit too nice. Dramatically.
It's done well, yeah.
Yeah, it's done very well. That's where it started slowly pulling me in, and up until the halfway point, until Forrest Whitaker's character is introduced, I was in. I was definitely in, and maybe I wouldn't go as far as to say I was hooked, but it's definitely one of those films that would have passed the. If the film was interrupted and stopped for some reason, I would have been pretty disappointed because I wanted to see where it was going to go. That's always a test I put into a lot of these films. One thing I do want to change gears a little bit to is ultimately what I think is the main reason why this film does actually work dramatically. And we touched on Rachel McAdams' brief screen time here, and I feel like a lot of the trailers for this film have kind of used that as like the big crutch or the dramatic arc for this film, when in my opinion, that's not really the biggest arc for this film that really kept me engaged. And for me personally, it's the relationship that Billy Boyd has with his daughter. And I think that is really what is the main, I guess, quote-unquote gimmick here that I think is able to help this film, at least for me, see some separations between other traditional boxing films. And I think in that there is the reason why this film was able to stand out slightly more than I expected. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the daughter here, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that. What do you have to think about that, Steve?
Yeah, that is, as you mentioned, I don't remember that many boxing films where there is a relation with a father and their offspring, with their kid. Usually it's with the wife or with a girlfriend or even with a trainer, right?
Right.
There's always and coming up in the new film, Creed, you got the son of Creed with Rocky, and there's a relationship there and how they work together. But if I want to bring up a recent film, Ant-Man, and how that stood out with Thing's character, with his daughter, you don't necessarily see that. So it is, and it does stand out. It does stay on its own. Ant-Man, with that relationship of this one character with his kid, because all the other heroes don't have that. It's usually something else. It's usually their peers or the love interest or whatever. Pretty much like boxing in most boxing films. So I do agree with you in that aspect. You don't necessarily see that type of. That was very interesting, and that was I could say that makes Southpaw really stand out on its own, as a connection factor of two characters.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I took away from it as well. What do you have to think about that, JD?
Well, it's a little bit tricky for me and a little bit twofold, because I do need to go back to some of the ego stuff that you were talking about before. I know we kind of shifted gears, but there is a lot more to that I do need to touch on. But it does relate to what you're talking about with his daughter, because I agree with you. A lot of that I think works really well. I think the little girl, I'm not even sure how to pronounce her name, but the actress that plays Leela is really good. I think she's very committed in this performance, and for how young she is, it's pretty impressive. I think it's really good. And of course, with Jake being Jake, when we get scenes with the two of them, it is really good and pretty powerful. And I think a lot of it works because the Gyllenhaal character of Billy, he's having to lay down his pride and he's having to lay down his ego to a degree, because even in the ring, he's having to learn how to train differently. He's had to get a job that he doesn't want to have. He's having to be patient with his daughter, who at one point hates him. And that dynamic was really interesting, because Jake Gyllenhaal's character, as you can imagine, as it follows the formula, he goes into some pretty dark territory. Now, I think the way Gyllenhaal plays that is great, and I want to talk more about that here in a little bit, but the way that the daughter reacts to it is pretty visceral, I think, and it's pretty realistic. She becomes a little put off by her dad because he goes off on this isolated tangent because he's very heartbroken, which is also, I think, realistic in a lot of ways. I think a lot of people would react that way, but because he essentially detaches himself from everyone around him, including his daughter, it makes for some really interesting dynamics, especially as the arc starts to go down the hill a little bit, and there's some redemptive factors that start happening. I love the way a lot of that is handled, and we can talk more about that here in a little bit. But his dynamic specifically with the daughter, I think, was really well earned, especially by the end of it.
Yeah, I completely agree. In fact, I almost would go as far as to think, I guess, I'm trying to see if I can pronounce her name. I think it's Una Lawrence. I think her name might be. It's
That's
really
as good as I could say.
It's,
so, yeah.
It's her first name that's really tripping me up a little bit. Una. Regardless, I would almost go as far as to say that she may give or at least my personal favorite performance in this film, because you're absolutely right with how committed that she is, and maybe I'm just a sucker for a good child performance, and anytime a child, especially one that looks like as young as she is, like I think she looks like she may be under 10 years old, and I wouldn't be surprised if she was.
I think she said she was 10 in the movie, so I mean, I don't know how old she is in real life, but the character was 10. So
yeah, regardless, though, at that young of an age to give such a committed performance in a film like this, I mean, I give you props like that, and I think that relationship why also works so well, and how it helps kind of, I guess, showcase a bit of the quote-unquote error of Billy Hope's ways, and how he has to, and how he basically has to almost like grow up himself to be able to find ways to support his daughter.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is that relationship is also used to do something that I think is also very interesting in a boxing film like this, where essentially the main character has to box in order to financially support someone, this one being his daughter, where the boxing in this film is not something that he's choosing to do or something that he's kind of lost himself within. This is something that he really has to consider doing, because he could get paid a lot to do this if he does well, and it's something that he has to consider helping for his daughter, and I found that kind of interesting in and of itself as well. So there are little things like that, but I think the relationship with his daughter really helped seal the deal there, and I believed every single second of it. And some of those scenes where they're together, and I guess it was in that home where she's temporarily being kept after he's temporarily lost custody of her after some of these events have turned out. There are scenes where she even says that she doesn't want to see him, and I'll leave it at that because I don't want to get too much into detail on that, but some of those scenes were very, very heartbreaking for me, and this is coming from someone that I'm not even a parent yet. I'm not even. I mean, you could probably relate to a lot more already, JD, than I could. But someone like me, the fact that I found that so heartbreaking just shows how visceral that this really was, since I can't even relate to it at that point yet. But it's very well done, surprisingly.
Well, and I think that's another reason why the Rachel McAdams character arc is pivotal to this film working, because the two are very twofold for me. And while there are superficial metaphors that parallel boxing as far as getting knocked down and getting up, I mean, I think that was a little on the nose at times, but however, I feel like the film gets to bigger issues surrounding pride and ego, as I was talking about, and for a sport that is centered around those notions, particularly inside the ring, it's interesting to see how it affects you outside the ring. And for the Billy character, I didn't find his pride too outlandish or with a lot of style like we see some of his opponents, but for him, I found it more emotional and more selfish, and that right, because he wanted to fight his way, even though his wife had long-term concerns. He didn't want to leave the hotel where this accident happens because of his emotions and how he wears it on his sleeve. And as he starts to grieve, it becomes about him and his pain. And like I said, he becomes detached from his daughter, his friends, his promoter, from reality in general, just everyone around him. And there's many examples where we see that. And I know that was some of the stuff you were talking about earlier in the first act, Brendan, that maybe you didn't like, but we do see his grief, and we see how emotions get the better of him. And as the film progresses, it's not so much for me about a story of redemption. I mean, it is, don't get me wrong, but rather overcoming that emotional pride. And in the end, I think it was his humbleness that earns that redemption, not the redemption itself, if that makes sense. I think that's why the pathos of the wife and the daughter, they both have to work together as he learns to embrace that pain and embrace that healing is great, which is why I love that scene at the end of the movie where he kind of drops to his knees and he says that line that he says that I won't reveal for spoilers, but the allegories there and the metaphor to me is awesome, because it's not about the redemption as much as he overcame himself and he had to learn to become humble. That's how he got his daughter back, not just by being good, if that makes sense.
No, and I think that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Steve. You're fine.
I want to mention the fact that it's that realization that I do have to box, and this is what, in a way, this is what I have to do and what I'm made to do. I kind of relate it to Rocky 2, which is my personal favorite Rocky film. And that Rocky, after going with the fight with Creed, And he says, no more rematch. He doesn't want to do another fight.
Sure.
And he tries to go into the workforce, and that doesn't work. He does his commercials, that doesn't work. And then he realizes that, no, I have to box. And I have to get back into the ring.
Yeah.
And do it for not only AJ, but now my coming baby. And for even for myself. Because this is my gift. This is what I have to do. And in some similar way, it can be added to this as well. Yeah, I guess most boxers in real life could attest to that as well. Like, yeah, I could try to do this and that, but, you know, I was put on this earth and this is, if I'm really good at this, and this is my way of redemption or anything. If I have to do it, I have to do it.
Right, and I think that's a great point. That, you know, and I think Rocky 2 is a great example that it really is. You know, it's the need to be in the ring as a means to support what's going on outside of the ring. And you know, while Southpaw isn't the first film to do this, we talked about that. It's definitely, you know, a conventional film as far as formula and storytelling is concerned. Those moments I think are well earned, and I think Rocky 2 is a great example of that because that's another film that does it. But I just feel like a lot of other sports films like this are, you know, definitely kind of more about the fight more than anything else these days, and it's nice to see a refreshing take of what's going on outside of the ring. But anyway, for the sake of time, I think we should definitely get to final thoughts. So Steve, any other final thoughts that you have, and then what grade would you give Southpaw?
I would say if you're a boxing fan or a fan of boxing film, sports film, I'll do watch it. Don't listen to most critics. It is a good movie. But I would say I would give it a solid B-. It does follow a lot of cliches, but as I mentioned before, if it pulls you in, just like a boxing match, you might know these two boxers, you might know how it goes, and if you watch all 12 rounds, if it does pull you in and does deliver at the end, then it's done its job, and that's what this does. It delivers.
All right. What about you, JD?
Well, one thing I want to touch on, Brendan, that you said right before you tossed it to final thoughts is how, you know, it's refreshing to see a film, while it is conventional, it spends a lot of time outside the ring and not so much time inside the ring. And I think that was one of my favorite parts about this is it is about the character and his fight, I guess, outside of the ring and him having to overcome that pride that he has and that guilt and the pain that he had built up. And it translates to some interesting stuff inside the ring, but it's really not so much about what happens inside the ring, which I really like. And going back to something you were saying, Steve, about his devotion to boxing, I think that is a key part to this formula working and this character also working. It was one of the first things I wrote in my notes too, in terms of how he had to learn to embrace that pain and that healing process. And I think Fuqua does a good job of showing us that. Of course, Gyllenhaal is great at showing and selling that too. But when we get to those notions of humbleness and how that, for me, was the root of his redemption, in conjunction with his devotion to the sport. Like, it was his passion to want to be inside the ring and earn money so that way he could get his daughter. Like, all of that, it had to be both of them for it to really work well.
Yeah.
So, and I love that. So, I guess in terms of just general final thoughts, you know, not every film has to reinvent the wheel. This doesn't do it by any means. It's as tropey and as cliche as possible, but you know, I think that's fine because in terms of execution, they give me exactly what I wanted out of it. It's great acting. They sell the story, they sell the heart of it, and I was emotionally moved by it, and that's all that matters for me. I mean, when I was walking out of the movie, I just kept thinking about that last scene where Billy drops to his knees and he's essentially talking to his wife and talking about moving on and healing and what that meant for him. I bought it. I totally bought it. I loved it. And I love films that can give you raw, emotional heartbeats that center around family. I just am very much drawn to that. So despite the conventionalness of it, I think the spirit transcends it, like I was saying, in Trainwreck. And for me, it works. So I would probably give this like a B or B+ in that range.
Yeah, I could definitely see your point. I could definitely agree with most of what you're saying there, JD, in that I do think as far as, you know, convention is concerned, you know, we've beat the dead horse here a little bit, that yes, this story is definitely nothing new, but it doesn't need to be, exactly as you said. It executes, overall, this film, I think, is very well executed in telling us something that we pretty much know how it's going to play out. But like you said, you buy into it by the end of this film, and it is pretty heartbreaking. In fact, you're talking about there's this, the scene where he kneels down and says something that's very cathartic. As much as I love that scene, there's a scene of embrace that he has with another character. I'll leave it at that, and then the camera just slowly pans out, and then fade to black and end credits.
Amazing.
That was what got me, and I feel like it's a scene like that is the reason why this film ultimately works, is because of that relationship. And I think that was the icing on the cake for me. So while I do think some parts of the first half did come off as a little sterile at points because it was a little over the top in some aspects, I was still brought back in by the midpoint to the end of this film. Some other things I did want to bring up, just some other criticisms I had. I do think the quote-unquote antagonist of this film is very shallow, and I do wish we would have maybe gotten some time, maybe a little bit more time more spent there. But then again, maybe that's trying to veer away from some of these tropes and convention that this film already has. So maybe it's a good thing we didn't get to know any more of this character. But at the same time, me personally, I think I would have liked to see a little bit more there.
That's fair.
And another thing that I just want to bring up is there's something that happens like maybe 2/3 of the way through where I'm trying to say this without getting too much into spoilers. And essentially, it's I guess that there's a death scene that is not shown but is merely mentioned, and it involves it basically is there to be kind of like, I guess, quote unquote motivation for the Forrest Whitaker character, and I'm only going to leave it at that. But to me, that was very unearned for me. And I think it's because not only was it because we didn't get to know this specific character that much, but I think to use this death as a plot to drive someone else's development, especially the nature of who this character was, I found it I wouldn't say unforgivable, because that might be kind of a bit strong of a word, but it was a bit harsh for me. I did find that a bit too much.
Sorry to cut you off real fast.
That's fine.
It didn't feel necessary either, because there was a scene earlier where the Forrest Whitaker character, he shows up in court in support of the Jake Gyllenhaal character, meaning that relationship has built, and he is concerned, and they are working together at this point, that it didn't need that extra force of motivation. That relationship was already building, so when there's a turn with that relationship to, I guess, going forward with this bigger fight, that felt forced to me. And so then there's that thing that you're talking about, which brings them back, and it's like you were kind of contradicting yourself. If they just would have went, I think, even more by the numbers, it would have made the script tighter and probably work even better.
No, I completely agree. And I think also, just the nature of who this character was that this event, quote unquote, happened to, I think some people could potentially find it offensive. But I don't know. I want to leave it at that, because it's definitely, the trailer's already spoiled too much. I don't want to support what the trailer's already done. So I'll leave it at that. But it is something that rubbed me a little bit the wrong way. But it wasn't enough to take me out of the film, because as I mentioned, by the end I was brought back, I was moved, and it gave me exactly what I wanted. And also, something you didn't even mention, JD, James Horner's score.
Oh, yes. How could I forget?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's very good. It's very good. It really is. It may not. It's definitely one of his more somber, almost experimental scores, I guess you can say. In fact, I would not have known it was James Horner if the opening credits didn't mention his name there. But it's a very good score as well, and it also has a great title at the end. Rest in peace to our friend James Horner, which is very heartbreaking in of itself.
I lost it. I'm not gonna lie.
And just on that note, rest in peace, James Horner. You were a great composer. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed this film more than I thought. I would give this a B. I think it's definitely one that I think a lot of the critics are unfairly criticizing this for being conventional, when it doesn't need to be anything new. It really doesn't. The heart is there. Go be moved by it, folks. Just take it for granted for what it is, and I think you'll be moved by it. But anyway, we will have more thoughts on our Letterboxd page on Southpaw, which you can check out at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm.
And if you agree or disagree with our takes, let us know by leaving a comment on our Facebook page at facebook.com/InSessionFilm. You can tweet us at InSessionFilm, or just leave a comment on Google+, or email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com.
All right, the InSession Film Top 3 is next. We're going over our top 3 favorite sports movie moments or scenes.
Feel the rhythm. Feel the rhyme. Get on up. It's bobsled time.
I was wondering what you're going to interrupt me with, but I'm glad that was it.
Yes.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
The InSession Film Top 3 is brought to you by the First Time Watchers podcast. And Brennan, of course, we just got done talking about Southpaw. And I got to say, just like that movie, the First Time Watchers podcast, it's a knockout of a show.
And they certainly pack a good punch. And just like we used to set up the clip, I love them. They're all I care about. That's it. Just us. That's all that. Oh, not
Exactly.
really. I think Tim would be a little weirded out by that because they got families of their own. Anyway, but regardless of how we feel about them, they are a great supporter of our show, and definitely a podcast that you guys out there, if you love movies, you got to check them out. Hosted by Tim, Walter, and Hermano, and not only do they know their movies, they love each other. They're all they care about. It's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Their chemistry is wonderful. The banter is amazing, and overall, the show is just very entertaining, like Jake Gyllenhaal is in every one of his movies.
Where is his Oscar?
Exactly.
Where is his Oscar?
He needs it.
He needs it, but he definitely he knows how to throw out some unique roles. But speaking of uniqueness, what's unique about the First Time Watchers is that every week they'll pick out a movie that they've never seen before, watch it, and discuss it on their show to create this real fresh perspective on their opinions on these films, which is very interesting. They'll also discuss other movies and other trailers that they've seen recently, which makes it really entertaining to listen to.
Absolutely. And they also give out some great movie recommendations at the end of the show that I would also pay attention to. And overall, the show is just so smart. It's fluid. It's easy to listen to. You can just tell they're having a lot of fun while bantering and giving each other a hard time. It's awesome. So that being said, Brendan, where can you find these guys on the internet?
There are a couple ways. You can check them out at firsttimewatchers.blogspot.com, and also hit them up on Twitter at firsttimewatchers, and also on Facebook. Just search for First Time Watchers, and there you go.
Yeah, definitely go subscribe to them on iTunes, and while you're there, leave them a review and let them know that we send it to them. I promise it's awesome. It's absolutely worth your time. Again, that's First Time Watchers.
Slip away.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 127, and now we're going to be going over our top 3 sports movie scenes or moments. I'm really excited about this. I don't know how you guys feel. I'm a big sports fan as well as a big movie fan, so I had a lot of fun doing research for this, watching a bunch of clips. It was a ton of fun, so I look forward to this. Steve, before we get into it, though, let's toss it to you first. Did you have any criteria that you used to pick your list this week?
No, for me, it's either what really I remember the most. So even like thinking of a list or thinking of sports movies, just whatever scenes that resonated with me. So I just went back to watch it and then like make a Google search of top best 10 scenes of sports, because everything's all different, I guess.
Sure.
I suppose.
Yeah.
And I even looked at the non-conventional sports films.
Okay.
So anything that would athletics, I guess you could say.
Fair enough.
So that's my thing. So that's my criteria, I guess.
Okay, what about you, Brendan?
Well, yeah, so for a list like this, and normally for our top 3s, I usually like to add some, I guess, diversity, if you want to say that, and variety. But for a list like this, I wanted to try and maintain some consistency. So I wanted to really just focus on films that, or at least sports films and moments specifically, that I found kind of moving and definitely very poignant.
Yeah.
So, and I wanted to keep I wanted to just kind of be fair and judge all those different moments amongst each other. So I wanted to focus on strictly those kinds of films. So, as much as I love films like, Caddyshack and even The Sandlot and Little Giants and The Mighty Ducks, I'm not including those films.
Okay.
So just for things like that. And also, just as an FYI, JD, I know there's one film that you've got in your personal penalty box that you'll go over a little bit, but it's not in my penalty box yet.
That's
so
yeah.
I may have to include a scene from that film.
Good.
But
I'd like to talk about it.
Yeah. But just for the sake of you not bursting out into tears, I'll pick a scene that probably won't make you cry.
Fair enough. Sounds good.
But there are a lot of great scenes from this film, but we'll get to that later.
All right. Yeah, I'm right with you guys. I just wanted to pick scenes that resonated with me, whether it was a speech or a moment or whatever. It could be within the action itself. It doesn't really matter. I just wanted 3 that just really stood out to me personally for whatever reason. That being said, there are a couple that I had to leave off as well. And of course, fans of the show will know that in my personal penalty box, I have to include the movie Warrior. I've talked about this movie 1,000 times on the show. In fact, when we did our top 3 sports movies all the way back on episode 8, which feels like forever ago, that was my number 1. So, and I've talked about it a lot since then. So, of course,
I didn't even exist then.
No. And so the ending specifically to Warrior is one that would make my list if I was doing a true list. And another one I'm going to keep off too, because I've talked about it a lot lately, especially over the last, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 months or so, is Field of Dreams. And so I'm going to keep off the ending to Field of Dreams as well, where he asks his dad for a catch. I love that scene. I've talked about that a lot recently as well. So I didn't include that, although it would also most likely make a top 3 in a true list. So that being said, let's toss it to you first, Steve. What is your number 3?
My number 3, it's from Rocky 2. And as I mentioned when we were talking about Southpaw, is that Rocky comes to realize that he has to fight. Is that scene where he's in the hospital with Adrian, and Adrian reinforces that, saying, win, win. And then the music builds up and everything, and then we get straight into the montage, and it reinforces the Rocky, gives him life to, like, yeah, this is what I gotta do. I gotta fight Apollo. I gotta do this for Adrian, for myself, and even the city of Philadelphia. So that one scene alone where Rocky's were really broken down, and then Adrian gives him, or I would say, gives him life again, or he's born again through Adrian. That's really powerful.
What's the over-under as far as Rocky references in this discussion?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know. That's a really good...
Steve, I did it!
Yeah, that's a really good moment and a really good choice for your number 3. Brendan, what do you got at number 3?
Well, I guess we can beat a dead horse a little bit already. So while Rocky 2 is not my favorite of the Rocky films, in fact, it might not even be my second favorite, but I do really like the film. I do think now I'm trying to remember the film though. So Steve, I guess the moment that you're mentioning when it works its way towards that montage, that also includes specifically when it's the running scene again with him running through Philadelphia, but at this time he's got everyone following him.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because that moment with everyone following him specifically is my number 3 from Rocky 2.
Nice.
When you got Gonna Fly Now by Bill Conti still playing in the background. Because as I mentioned, as much as I love Rocky 2, it's definitely one of the better films of this saga. It's not quite my personal favorite, but I feel like this here is the defining moment for not only what happened before, but what continues to happen within this whole franchise. I think this is a very important scene for Rocky himself, to just the realization here of what he can not only do to himself to make himself happy by striving for his dreams, but how positively this affects everyone around him. And I think the fact that you've got everyone following him in this great run through the quote unquote, I guess, great city of Philadelphia. I'm not a big fan of Philadelphia, but but it's a beautiful moment, a beautiful song, and I feel like this is a culmination of what makes this saga so good. At least why I like it is because of this scene and that moment specifically when everyone's following him. That's why I put that at number 3.
Well, let's just cap this off. So,
you got to be kidding me.
No, okay, mine isn't from Rocky 2. Mine is from the first Rocky, but this is hilarious, though. But I'm going with Rocky versus Apollo Creed from the first film. And I think what I like about this is, you know, for Rocky Balboa, there was a lot where he didn't necessarily have the will to win as much as he had the will to earn his respect as well as everyone else's. And, you know, I love that that's what that film is about. It's not that you have to win to be a winner. It was that he had respect for himself. He had respect that he was able to do something that everyone said that he couldn't, which was last all 15 of those rounds. And I think that's what I love about that, because how many times, and not just boxing movies, but in sports movies in general, does the hero lose? It's not often. And so I love that the film wasn't so much about that as much as it was about the character, I guess. And some of the stuff that we've talked about, and not just Southpaw, but other movies, I really dig that about the movie. So I love how, as the fight finishes, there's a lot of layers going on there. I mean, there's the announcement, there's the I'm not going to do the rematch, there's the Adrian. Like, all of that is going on at the exact same time, and it all feels natural within the moment of what was happening there. It was just such a wonderful, beautiful crystallization to that movie that really stands out for me. So that's why I went with that for my number 3. There's so many to pick from, though. I think, Brendan, we're going to have to do a Rocky movie series at some point.
Yeah.
We could do that leading up to Creed. You know, we
could.
Yeah, you could, yeah.
And now I guess at least the first 5 films are on Netflix now. And, you know, kind of going off of what you were talking about with the first film there, JD, because I was, you know, trying to catch up with at least the first one, because it's been a while since I've seen it. I was watching it on Netflix, and that scene in particular, that's basically an honorable mention for me, is the sense that it's probably my number 4 pick, but specifically it's when he is yelling out for Adrian's name at the end, and you notice that's all he cares about.
You
got the commentator next to him trying to give him an interview, and he like,
doesn't even care.
I just want to see my fiance.
And
then it shows right when he says that, it cuts to a shot of Adrian trying to work her way through the crowd. She loses her hat at one moment and doesn't even acknowledge
just keeps going. Yeah,
she just keeps going. It's beautiful. It really is.
And then of course they also claim their affection there at the end too. It was always about that. I love that. And because while all that's going on, there's the celebration and the fans are cheering and they're announcing the winner. Rocky doesn't care about any of that. So,
right. No, he doesn't.
It's beautiful. So good. So, all right, Steve, what do you got at number 2?
Number 2 is Rudy, when Rudy does take the field.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a it's a cliche choice, but it's such an uplifting moment.
Sure. Yeah.
And you got everybody cheering Rudy. You got Favreau there, his best friend, and then when he does take the field, and then that iconic music, right? I mean, we've heard this score so many times. And then he does take the field, and he gets that tackle, and that's the film. And that's the one moment that's really up. That's the good thing that's also the good thing about sports, is that when you have a player or somebody that takes the field and everyone's invested in his player or team, and they do something, and which brings everyone together to cheer their name and everything like that. It brings a whole community together for this one moment.
Yes.
And it's that one moment which really gets you.
Yeah. I have a bittersweet reaction to that movie and that moment every single time, because I hate Notre Dame. like as a Michigan fan, it's just ingrained into you as a little kid. But at the same time, I watched that movie and I love it, and I love that scene and that moment you're talking about. It's very emotional. It completely works for all the reasons you're saying, Steve. I wouldn't blame anybody. It is an honorable mention. I'll just say that for me, but. For as much as I hate Notre Dame, that movie it's very good, and it's a great moment to choose for sure.
It's an underrated film too, because I'll also share your hatred for Notre Dame, JD. Every time I hear that they're trying to join the Big Ten, I'm like, no, we won't take you guys.
Screw you guys. Yeah. Well, I feel you. All right, Brendan, what do you got at number 2?
So for my number 2, I'm going to your penalty box film, JD, with the film Warrior, and it's a scene that doesn't even include any fighting, but it's a conversation between Tommy and his father, played by Nick Nolte, that takes place at what looks like in a part of a casino, and then leads to a great scene in the hotel.
Oh my gosh!
Where were you when it mattered? I needed this guy back when I was a kid. I don't need you now. You know, it's too late now. Everything has already happened. You and Brendan don't seem to understand that. Let me explain something to you, okay? The only thing that I have in common with Brendan Conlon is that the pair of us, we have absolutely no use for you. Look at you. Yeah. I was right. I think I liked you better when you were a drunk. At least you had some balls there, not like now, tiptoeing around like some beggar with your cup out. Take it somewhere else, all right? In fact, you know what? Here's a cup. Why don't you take this and go get yourself some more of your tapes, and you go back to the room and you listen to some more fish stories that no one gives a shit about. And get out of here. Get the fuck out of here. Come on.
It's this scene is the reason why Nick Nolte got nominated for an Oscar for this film.
So good.
I mean, and it's as someone like me who, like I said, I'm not married. I don't have any kids of my own yet, but my heart broke for Nick Nolte in this scene specifically, and he sells it. When you've got Tom Hardy, who's playing Tommy here, and basically throws the quarters at him, saying like you were never there for us. He's essentially saying.
Yeah.
And just a paraphrase, I don't want to go too much into detail, but what a heartbreaking scene. I can watch that over and over again. I just get teared up. As much as people talk about the final fight, as great as that is, this is the scene that gets me the most. And culminates to, I guess he was listening to an audio of Moby Dick and he was screaming it. I think it was Moby Dick. I can't quite remember, but I'm gonna stop there because I think JD's tearing up.
You're not lying. It's tough for me to talk about. In all honesty, it really is, and that scene is arduous. It absolutely is, because Nick Nolte's character he's a dad that was doing nothing really more than looking for redemption. He knows that he was a terrible father. And
he's so self-aware of it. I love that.
He's absolutely self-aware of it, and he was sober and trying to do the right thing, and Tom Hardy's character wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. And you get to that scene, and he tosses the quarters at him, and Nolte's face is devastating to me, but even more so when he goes up to the hotel room, and of course he starts drinking again, and then Hardy's character comes in and just kind of embraces him. I can't even talk about it right now.
I'm tearing up too. We got to move on. We got to move on.
Absolutely, it destroys me. And then you carry that forward with that ending fight as well. It's just an emotional film.
JD, just stop. Just stop.
Good call. I love it.
I'll just put a cap on it by saying this: if anyone out there who loves sports movies you haven't seen this movie yet, what the hell is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Stop right now and watch it. It's a chore. It's a chore. That's your homework.
Yeah, it's. I could have picked just 3 scenes from that movie for my top 3. Really. Yeah.
So good.
Good stuff.
So good.
For my number 2, I'm going to go something to a little bit happier, I guess, but something that gives me goosebumps every time as well. So a lot of times in sports, we get the coach inspirational speech, right? And a lot of times it comes either at halftime or before the game, sometimes even after the game, whether they win or lose. But for my number 2, I'm going to a speech that happens in the middle of the game. It's like the end of the first quarter or the beginning of the second quarter in football. And Coach Yost, and Remember the Titans, goes off. And I love it where he says, I don't want them to gain another yard. You blitz all night. If they cross the line of scrimmage, I'm going to take every last one of you out of the game. You make sure they remember forever the night they played the Titans. It's so good.
Fists in the air.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, I love it. It's so good. And then there's a great transition to the rest of the game where they're just beating the snot out of this team. And it's glorious. Absolutely glorious. I love the way that it's shot. It's really well acted. And of course, Will Patton, when he's delivering that line, of course, I don't do it justice at all. But in the movie, it's so powerful and incredible. It gives me goosebumps and makes me want to go destroy a quarterback. So it makes my number 2.
God. And it leads to I think in my opinion, the best, like I guess the most well shot game of the entire film.
Oh yeah, sure.
And the topper of that is when you got Denzel Washington who throws the banana at the other coach.
Yes.
Because he called him a monkey in the interview before. I love it.
Yeah, and I love how like right after they show the defense just manhandling the other team or whatever, there's a shot where Coach Yost yells at Denzel Washington's character, and he's basically saying, just light him up. Just put up a whole bunch of, I think exactly what he says is leave no doubt. Mm-hmm. And it's so good. He was so pissed, and it works. Oh, I love it. It's very good stuff.
And the sound editing that comes later is phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually did review Remember the Titans all the way back on episode 27, a whole 100 episodes ago. If you guys want to go and check that out. So I figured it's been a while since we talked about it. I could bring it up again. So
yeah, why not? Why not?
All right, Steve, what do you got at number 1?
Before I go into number 1, let me just say I do also hate Notre Dame.
Yes.
I have a coworker, and all over his office is all Notre Dame paraphernalia.
Yeah.
The Sports Illustrated cover with the helmet.
Sure.
It makes me sick. Every time I go into his office, I just want to bark.
Yeah.
So let me just say that.
And for Notre
Michigan.
and if there yes, exactly. If there's any Notre Dame fans out there listening, we don't hate you as people. Just your team.
It's just your team and everything your team stands for. All your values and everything.
Steve, you can come back to the show more often.
You're welcome back anytime. Yes. All right, what do you got at number 1, man?
Number 1 is from White Man Can't Jump.
Okay,
and it's at the very end when Billy Hoyt finally scores a slam dunk. And it's at this moment in the film where he's lost everything. He's lost his girl, Rosie Perez. He's lost where he lived and everything. And he puts everything into this one game through Sydney Wesley Snipes' character.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the film really is almost builds up to this moment where the Woody Harrelson, who plays Billy Hoyt, does perform a slam dunk. And it's really it's sort of, I would say it's almost similar to Rudy, where it's a rousing moment.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's a personal win, where everything around him crumbles, but it's a very personal win for Billy, and also for when you're following a character throughout the whole film, and you see his ups and downs, and you see him at the end of his rope, and where everything's broken and everything it's almost, you could say, over. At least this one little thing, even though it's very minuscule and it doesn't mean anything in the long aspects. Like tomorrow he's got to find a job and figure out what the hell to do with his life. But it's these small personal wins where any of us in life we get. I want to say, I want to give this one story where me and my buddy were at a pool hall, and my buddy was like getting every ball in, and this one guy came up and started congratulating him, and he said this one thing. It's like, you know what? It's good you have this feeling. It's good to feel like a king for a day.
Yeah, sure.
And it's like we do have those moments where it does really feel good it's maybe ego driven, but it feels really good. It's to be a king for the day. And for it's a personal win. And I take it from this film, from White Man Can't Jump, where he does perform a slam dunk. and he does win the game, but it's personal for him. And if you're connecting to the character, so that's my number one moment from a sports film.
No, yeah, it's a great symbolic win on top of the physical win within the basketball game. I completely agree with you. Although I think it would be funny to see Woody Harrelson actually try this in real life. Probably wouldn't happen like we see it in the movie. But at the same time, I completely agree, though. There is a personal connection with the slam dunk. There's a symbolic metaphor there that does resonate if you connect with the character. And while the movie itself is fun and goofy and a heck of a time, but at the same time, there is a resonance to it that you can certainly grab onto. I completely agree with that. So it's one I haven't seen in a long time, but I do really like that movie overall, though.
Yeah, it's a out of the two movies that they made together, Woody and Wesley Snipes, it's definitely the better of the two.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
White Man Can't Jump. Go watch that along with Warrior if you haven't seen it.
Absolutely. All right, Brendan.
Well said.
All right, Brendan, what do you got at number one?
So JD, you already talked about the quote unquote speech that has to happen in every single sports football film specifically.
Yeah.
And I'm doing that for my number one. And my number one takes place in halftime, and it's from the film Friday Night Lights, which I think is the best football film ever made. And it's Coach Gaines's speech at halftime in the final game of this film. Within this speech, he says something specifically that I'll get to in a second that really speaks to me. But really, essentially what this speech is about what it means to be perfect. And he doesn't talk about being perfect as what that scoreboard represents out there, but it's about that relationship that you that you have with your family, your friends, and ultimately your teammates who are now your brothers. And while I love that notion in and of itself, I think the reason why this hits home for me is because first thing he says something about a lot of these kids after this game is done will never play football again. And then he says something at the end where he says, I want you to take a moment. I want you to look at each other in the eyes. I want you to put each other in your hearts forever, because forever is about to happen here in just a few minutes. That hit so home for me because it really gives you the notion of how a single small event, only 2 quarters long, will change the face of these kids' lives forever. I was floored by that, absolutely floored by it. And at the same time, it also delivers the notion of why sports teams themselves are, kind of a necessity in many ways, because it really is about that brotherhood. And it's wonderful, it's poignant, and in my opinion, Billy Bob Thornton sells it in such a way that if we want to talk about what the snub, where was his nomination for that?
He was good. He was good, yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It really is. And while it may be a quote-unquote, I guess, nothing new kind of speech, because you get it in really every single one of these films where a championship game is essentially on the line, this one gets me every time. Absolutely every time. And when he says that about forever is icing on the cake. Love this. Love it.
No, I completely agree with you, Brennan. Although I would say Remember the Titans is my personal favorite football movie. This is probably my number 2 and sits pretty comfortably there as well.
Sure.
And I completely agree with you about that speech. I think it's really well done. As you were saying, the acting is really phenomenal there. And I also love how it takes a rocky turn. And again, it's not so much about the final result as much as it is about those ideals of character. And as much as I love that speech, my number 4, this was hard to leave off, but my number 4 is actually the scene with Boobie Miles in the car with his uncle
when he's cleaning out his locker.
Oh my gosh, when he has that
another honorable mention for me.
Oh my gosh, so good, and again, wonderful acting there, but again, there's a resonance of this is what I thought was the only thing I can do in my life. And now that's taken away from me. How do you respond to something like that? And he sells that incredibly well. It's incredibly well earned. But I agree with you. There's so many different moments, but that speech you're talking about is also very, very good as well. So.
Yeah, and I love how Boobie Miles is essentially hiding that emotion when he's still in his locker.
Exactly. He's playing it off. He's making jokes beforehand.
Yeah, but when he gets to that car and has that cathartic moment, you can tell he was just bottling it up, and then
Yeah.
he just let it out. And
Absolutely.
wonderful. It's wonderful.
Absolutely. So for my number one, I'm going to a sport that I love. It is definitely my number one. It's a movie that most people probably haven't seen, or if you have seen it, you've probably forgot about it. And even if you've seen it, you might not have even liked it. But I love it. For my number one, I'm going to the movie Mystery Alaska. Particularly,
oh my gosh.
Yep. Particularly, the scene I'm talking about is the character of Billy Pruitt, played by Maury Chaykin, and he is talking about the town of Mystery. And I'm going to play that clip right here.
We do have our pride. And maybe sometimes it's a little too connected to how well we play hockey, but we do have our pride. And all of you and all the TV commentators have been going around saying that this is a farce, that this is all a big joke. Our town is a big joke.
Is there a legal argument coming?
It's a stopple. It's in my brief. What did you call? You called my friend something before. What did you call him?
A lumberjack.
That boy has a heart bigger than this whole courtroom. He plays to play. He skates to skate. He don't make $1 million a year. He loves the game of hockey. He loves it.
He skates to skate. He plays to play. He loves the game of hockey. He loves it, Billy Pruitt just said. And for me, I think that's why this movie and this scene specifically resonates, is as a kid growing up playing hockey and loving it. And of course, I never played for $1 million either. I played because I love the game of hockey. And for me, this movie touches on those notions in ways that, one, isn't a joke like the Mighty Ducks movies, and two, it is emotional and it absolutely resonates with me. And sure, there are some flaws to the movie, but I think overall, I like how they treat the subject material with respect and with some grit that I think really... It just really resonated with me. And that scene specifically, I think, gets to the heart of it. Is this town, like many towns across America and across the world, they play sports because they love it. And as a hockey fan, as someone who plays and loves the game, I love it. And it just reverts some expectations that just I love. So that being said, I could talk about this forever, but Mystery Alaska and that scene specifically makes my number one.
It's been a while since I've seen this one. It really has, but I do remember. You definitely picked, in my opinion, the best scene from the film. I mean, and I think it definitely delivers a really interesting notion about the why that we. The passionate why we choose to do a certain sport rather than just about being the brotherhood or whatever like that, because it's interesting that specific regions of the world and this country specifically as an example all flock to different sports for different reasons, like hockey being very prevalent within the north, like when I talk about Friday Night Lights, that takes place in Texas, and that's high school football yet again too, which is very interesting. But it's a very interesting notion about locational passion for sports, which I thought was really interesting. But that scene sells that. I think it sells it for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it gets to those ideas you're talking about. And I love how, because a lot of the drama is centered around this professional hockey team coming, and it's so easy to look at it as a joke, as the antagonists of the movie. They do look at it that way. But for this town, it was their reputation. It was the core of their identity, I guess. And when you are talking about that in relation to sports, it does get to those questions of why, like you're talking about. And I love how that scene just really spits that out in a really emotional way that is awesome to me. So I love it. On that note, though, let's talk about honorable mentions. Steve, did you have any honorable mentions?
It's actually going back to Friday Night Lights, but actually the TV series. It's in Episode 4 of Season 1 is the ones there. Let me just say that there are a lot of great scenes in the entire series, and it is a very good series to watch, just to see not only about the sport of football, but how it affects a small town and even how everyone gets caught up in with the game of football and how it does affect their lives. So like most kids, this is all they have, and
yeah, sure.
And that goes along with many real life stories. But there is one scene, I think it's episode 4. Is when Coach Taylor, Kyle Chandler, he gets Matt Saracen, and it's raining. It's at night, but he's just getting Matt Saracen because he's now QB1, just to practice throwing the ball and being accurate. And for some reason, it just resonated with me. Just seeing that, and that's the one moment where I don't look at Kyle Chandler anymore as Kyle Chandler, but just as Coach Taylor.
Sure.
And even the guy who plays Matt Saracen, I just see him as QB1. It's very, for some reason, it just has that impact towards me. And if you can find that clip and see it, if you're a sports fan or even a fan of drama in general, just to see a coach trying to work with a kid and trying to hone his skills and trying to perfect it. Or not even perfect it, but just work on the skills and just a simple thing. It's a very simple scene, but it works great for dramatic effect, and that really sticks with me.
Okay, what about you, Brendan?
I haven't checked out the series yet, as much as I love the film.
I
so
know.
now I kind of feel
Me
like I'm a
too.
bit. I think I'm in the penalty box for that one. I feel because I've heard great things about the show, and now I really want to definitely see if I can make some time for that because I do like the cast in it as well. But for honorable mentions for me, and I do have a lot of repetition of other films, but. JD, you talked about Remember the Titans, and an honorable mention for me was actually the scene, basically the realization that these guys are starting to get to know each other better despite their race and despite their color, and
sure.
it's the strong side,
Yep.
left side,
Yep.
strong side,
Yep.
left
Yep.
side. That's a beautiful moment for me, an honorable mention for me when Boobie Miles cleans out his locker from Friday Night Lights,
Yep.
the finale of Rocky, but just something new. From the movie $1 Million Baby is when Scrap, played by Morgan Freeman, knocks out Sherelle, played by Anthony Mackie.
Yes.
Fists in the air. It's almost
Yeah.
to the point that I want to see Morgan Freeman come on board as a Marvel villain just so he and Falcon can square off again.
Nice. Yeah.
But that's and also I can just put the entire movie of Warrior as an honorable mention as well.
Yep.
So, but we'll leave it at that because there are a lot of other great films out there that I haven't even seen yet either. It's definitely a hard one to do, but those are my honorable mentions.
Yeah, as far as honorable mentions for me, I'll try to go through these quickly. Obviously, I talked about Warrior, I talked about Field of Dreams, I talked about the other scenes within Remember the Titans and Friday Night Lights as well. A couple others just to mention real fast. Major League. I like when Jake Taylor points for the home run at the end of the movie is awesome, or even when Wild Thing walks out. I hate the Indians, but I quite enjoy that movie. The ending to Hoop Dreams, the You Were Born for This speech in Miracle. I also had the ending to Rudy as well. How about finishing the race in Cool Runnings? Pretty awesome moment from my childhood. Absolutely love that one as well.
Add that to my honorable mentions. I forgot about that.
Yes.
Forgot about it.
So good. The ending to Rush from a few years ago. I'm not a big race car fan, but I quite loved that movie. And then the last one for me is the Seabiscuit versus War Admiral stakes race. I thought was pretty great in Seabiscuit. So anyway, that is all I had for my honorable mentions.
Let us know how your picks stack up against ours. You can email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com or leave us a comment on Facebook or Twitter or directly on our website at InSessionFilm.com.
All right, before we move on, let's talk about this week's poll.
It's real bad, okay? I don't like those numbers at all.
Just one poll. Those things aren't scientific.
Yes, they are. All this is science. This is math.
All right, for our poll this week, inspired by Jake Gyllenhaal and his film Southpaw, we asked, what is your favorite boxing movie? And the options we threw out there was Rocky, The Champ, Raging Bull, The Hurricane, Ali, Cinderella Man, $1 Million Baby, The Fighter, or simply other that you could write in your own film if you wanted to. And as for the results of the poll, this was kind of it wasn't a barn burner, I'll say that. Winning by a large margin was Rocky at 40% of the vote. But coming in at second place was Raging Bull at 27% of the vote. And in third place, The Fighter coming in at 20% of the vote. So, and then kind of right there in fourth and fifth place was very, very, very close with Cinderella Man and $1 Million Baby. So,
did we get any write-in options for anything different? Because I'm trying to think if we forgot any.
We did not get any write-ins this week.
That's a shame.
Yeah, so
Well, I will, if anyone's, if you want to check out 2 boxing films that's not in the main category of boxing films, is Diggstown with Louis Gossett Jr. and James Woods, I believe, and also Gladiator with Cuba Gooding.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
check that out. That was a really good film back in those days.
Yeah, and we did get some comments for those actually on social media. So even if they didn't write them in, we did get those mentions via Twitter and Facebook. So anyway, thanks to everybody that did vote on the poll this week. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, and I want to make a confession because I actually expected Raging Bull to take this one home, to be honest. I'm not a fan of that film. I'm not a huge fan. Yeah,
this
I'm
is
not
InSession confession, Brendan.
I know. I just need to say. In fact, I almost thought about that for our last round of confession.
That would be a good one for that segment, though.
I'm not a huge fan of that film. I don't think it's bad, but I'm just not a huge fan.
Fair enough.
It's interesting. I just want I wanted to throw the controversy out there because you know how much I love to do that.
Of course. It did come in second, though, so a lot of people did vote for it.
Anyway, coming up next, we're going to be doing our discussion segment by taking a look at the film Pixels, the latest video game romp, or Adam Sandler romp, whatever way you want to look at it. But stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, I just want to pause for a quick second to say a huge thank you to those that are supporting the show. There's many ways that you can help support us, and one way you can do that is checking out our bonus content on our website for just a small donation of 99 cents. They actually are free to listen to, but we do encourage and appreciate that small donation. And if you just go to our website, you'll see the bonus content tab there, and we'll have everything laid out for you. Definitely go check out our last one where we talked about Comic-Con from this last year. It's awesome. We had a blast, so definitely go and check that out. One way that you can help us out, as you heard up at the top of the show, is Patreon.com. Patreon is a great source where you can essentially donate per show and earning free gifts at the same time. We have a couple different levels there, and the higher the level you give, the more you're going to get in the process. It's a win-win for everybody involved. You're going to get some really cool stuff in the process. And another way you can help us out is by donating directly to the show via PayPal. If you go to InSessionFilm.com/donate, you'll see the PayPal button there. And you can sign up for a one-time donation or a monthly subscription. There are a couple different options there. No matter what you do, we really do appreciate it.
Absolutely appreciate everyone's support there. And on the subject of getting, free gifts as far as Patreon.com is concerned, perhaps you want to get something specifically InSession Film related. There's a way you can do that. You can go to the InSession Film store by going to InSessionFilm.com/store. Perhaps you want an item such as a cool maybe mug, a tie, an iPhone case, whatever your heart may desire. And even on top of that, if you don't see something there that you like, a specific object like that, we can get something customized for you. Perhaps anything unique that you might want. Maybe you want an in-session film tattoo. I don't think we can do that, but maybe we might be able to find some interesting strings to pull for you. I don't know. Maybe we'll paint a picture for you. I don't know. But anyway, the point we're making is that we can get something customized for you if you want something a bit more unique to your fancy. But there's a lot of great stuff there that you can pick from, and also a great way to support us as well. Lastly, as many people already know, we are sponsored by Audible.com. The way you can support us is by going to Audible.com audibletrial.com/InSessionFilm. And by doing so, you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial by going over there. And at Audible, there are over 150,000 titles for you to choose from for either one of your smart devices, such as your iPhone, your Android, or even your Kindle, maybe an MP3 player. Perhaps you want to try reading up on the latest Star Wars collateral in preparation for The Force Awakens in December. Maybe you want to prep really early, and I don't blame you for doing so. Or perhaps you want to read up on the latest Marvel collateral, with Marvel Studios just eating the cake now at the movies. I wouldn't blame you for wanting to do that as well. The point is, there's a lot of great stuff for you to pick from there, and you'd also be supporting us at the same time. Really great win-win for everyone here.
Absolutely, and even just a like on Facebook or follow on Twitter, it all goes a really long way, and we really do appreciate everyone's support.
Hi, this is Greg.
This is Chuck.
And this is Dan, and we are Talking in Circles. Because the world needs another podcast, we are here as Geekcast Radio's newest edition.
And as the title says, each week we get lost in conversation about a wide range of topics, including movies, comics, games, art, TV, and even occasionally sports.
We play games and discuss pivotal topics like who would win in a fight, the Kool-Aid Man or Tony the Tiger, and examine the hot-button issues of the world of geekdom.
We keep things fresh by taking timeless topics in new directions. We are simply three friends having a fun time talking about life's most fascinating foibles.
Stay connected with us every Tuesday on iTunes or at geekcastradio.com.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 127. And for our discussion segment, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we were going to originally look at doing a segment of What the Snub and focus on Jake Gyllenhaal, but we've talked a lot about that already. So with another film like Pixels opening this weekend, and a film that is getting absolutely demolished by the critics, we thought we'd share our similar disdain for it if we are that way. I just thought it might make for some fun rants or just fun discussion overall. So, Steve, I'll toss it to you first, man. What did you think about this film? Are you with the critics on this one, or did you happen to find joy out of it?
Am I with the critics? Hell no.
Wow. Okay.
I think it's interesting because I find that Sandler and Michael Bay, if they have something out, I think it's like a group attack on these two.
Oh, sure.
And really like, yeah, okay, it's a new Sandler film. Oh my god, instantly gotta hate it.
Yeah.
Now, usually I'm not a Sandler fan. That being said, I'm not really particularly interested in to see his films. Although I do like some of his films. I think Wedding Singer is probably his best film.
I'd agree.
Yeah. And but another thing is that Pixels was shot in Toronto, and I have a vast interest in it. That myself and a bunch of my friends in the whole acting circle and everything, we were in it as background extras, as speaking roles and whatnot.
How fun! That's very cool.
So it was it's fun to just go see, like, oh, can I spot myself? And I do spot myself. I'm out of focus, but I do know where I am.
Nice.
3 shots. So that's
nice. Very cool.
But that being said, though, yeah, it's actually a very good film. It's good. It's not like great. It's not groundbreaking. No one in the future is gonna say, yeah, you know what, Pixels is a movie that made me want to be a filmmaker. You know, no, or any Sandler film. They're not gonna say that about Big Daddy or whatnot. So it's as a Sandler film, it's one of his best. As a high concept summer popcorn film, it's a good movie. It doesn't go beyond that, and there are a lot of great parts in it. There are a lot of misses. There are a lot of bad parts. There are a lot of parts where it's like, nah, this didn't hit at all. But it's not bad. It's an enjoyable film. It's something, honestly, I wouldn't mind owning just to see how they did most of the stuff. I think some of the direction from Chris Columbus is really, really amazing. The set pieces with the centipede, the Pac-Man scene is really shot well. And as I mentioned, it's one of Sandler's best. As a summer film, it's enjoyable. It's enjoyable to see.
Interesting. I think I already was right picking this topic. I think it's going to be an interesting discussion.
Yeah.
Before I get into my thoughts, JD, do you agree with what Steve has to say, or are you on the other side of the camp?
Well, I will say, of course, film is all subjective, and comedy is probably the most subjective, I feel like, of all the genres.
I agree.
I will agree with you, Steve, in the sense that I hate it when Adam Sandler and Michael Bay and whoever else you want to group into that category, people go in wanting to hate those films and wanting to criticize them before they even watch them. And I talked about that a lot last year when Transformers came out as well. And that being said, I'm not a huge Adam Sandler fan, but at the same time, because of that pet peeve of mine, I did go into open-minded, knowing that we were going to do this segment, knowing that the critics hated this movie. I still tried to give it an actual, legit, authentic shot, especially because right before I went into this, as many people may have seen, there was that video review that was going viral online a little bit from Movie Bob Reviews, I think is who it was. So
oh my god,
it's hilarious. It's very, very funny, and this guy loathed this movie. He hated it with a passion. And I'll say, if you have a strong nostalgic tie to these video games, I could certainly see you hating this movie. That being said, I wouldn't say that it's 15% on Rotten Tomatoes bad, which I think it's at right now, or in that range. But
it's closer to 20 now, but still.
Okay, so it's pretty bad. I will say I'm kind of on the other side of you, though, Steve. I think this is a bad movie. I don't think it's very good. There are some scenes that make me laugh. I like the scene where Sandler walks into the war room and he's basically pointing out everybody there and making jokes about them. That one I thought was pretty funny. The whole idea, though, of Kevin James being the president of the United States it's not just a gag that is supposed to be funny as much as it takes me out of the movie. It's so absurd. Yeah. And I can't even buy into this world. It's hard for me to even invest on a superficial level, let alone try to go forward with the story. But even as the story unfolds, there's really no motivation for these aliens coming down, or like it's pseudo explained but not really. And there's a lot of storylines like that just aren't fleshed out, that just don't make sense. And more so for me personally, I just didn't laugh very much. I thought the jokes were pretty corny or cliche or uninteresting to me, especially the stuff with Josh Gad. As much as I like Josh Gad, I really do. I just couldn't really get on board with anything he was doing in this movie. So, same thing with Peter Dinklage. As much as I love him, he's a great actor.
Yeah.
But what is he doing in this movie? It's so ridiculous, especially...
I absolutely agree with you. Most of the jokes from these two idiots, no, I can't get with it.
And even just from a story standpoint with the Eddie character, with the Pac-Man sequence, he does something that they don't explain. Like they bring it up as a dramatic element, and it's like, oh my gosh, he did something he wasn't supposed to, and they do nothing with it. They don't explain it at all. And it's I will say, sure, some of the nostalgia is there, seeing those characters come on screen or whatever. It's fun to a degree, but the movie itself is so bad. The screenplay especially is so atrocious that it was hard for me to have any fun. I mean, the most fun I had was with the music and the end credits, honestly.
I think I remember seeing your Facebook status saying, I enjoyed the end credits.
It was great.
Yeah, those end credits, it is phenomenal.
It is very good. I agree.
It's great.
It is
They're
very
interesting, good, So, this movie is kind of an enigma for me. It's a real mystery because, first off, you've got, I think, conceptually, the idea of real-life video games coming to attack us is, to put it lightly, it's brilliant.
It's very
awesome.
good, yeah.
It's awesome. And then you've also got a director, a real director, Chris Columbus, here to direct
who's done some really
like
great stuff, yeah.
He's done some bad stuff at the same time, but you're right, he's done some very good stuff. You know, like the Home Alone films, Mrs. Doubtfire, the first two Harry Potter films.
Yeah.
You know, he knows how to direct a film. Whether or not the film is good or bad, he knows how to direct. But I don't want people to be fooled by this, because just like all these other films that Sandler was in, they all have a weird kind of odd, stupid gimmick to them. Whether it be an annoying twin sister in Jack and Jill, whether it be the fact that he's the son of Satan in Little Nicky. That's the exact same thing here. Video games coming to attack us is just a gimmick for yet another Adam Sandler film by Happy Madison Productions.
Yep.
That is all this is. And I'm gonna I think aside from a few good action scenes like you were talking about, Steve, I think that Pac-Man sequence is great. I think the scene where they're playing for the first battle, where they're playing Centipede, and then you've got Loverboy's Working for the Weekend that plays in the background is awesome. Everything else was cringeworthy for me. This movie is trash. I hated it. Hated it. And hated it. And Movie Bob that you're that review that's going viral by Movie Bob says something in this film that I think is so accurate. If you love these games and you grew up playing these arcade games, this movie is going to make you hate those games. And I think he is exactly right. And I think the biggest problem I have with this film is not for the fact that I didn't even laugh at all. I don't think I laughed once. I mean, that scene is pretty amusing that you were talking about, JD, where, you know, Adam Sandler walks in and like has this orange weird shirt and shorts and making fun of everyone in the room. That was pretty amusing. Yeah. But I hardly laughed at all.
Me too.
And at the same time, I feel like, and maybe this is a bad way to judge this film is such a wasted opportunity.
Big time.
Because you've got this great concept, and it's trying to be like a Neo Ghostbusters, if you will. I mean, even Dan Aykroyd makes a cameo appearance in the beginning of the film.
Of course he does. In the 80s even.
Yeah, in the 80s. But it's such a wasted concept when you really think about it, not only because they take it in an Adam Sandler route. In fact, I think that's the only reason why they got Chris Columbus, because they wanted to make an Adam Sandler film that required more technical expertise, and they just needed someone, and he probably did it. But it's such a waste, and nothing here works. You know, it gets me compelled here. I also think the part of the concept itself is a bit contrived, and I'm kind of curious, why does it have to be aliens that attack us in this film? Why couldn't we just have video games come to life and want to attack us? I think that alone is very interesting.
It'd be the same thing, really, yeah.
Yeah, but I think you have more to do with it, with that simplicity, because you could have a good satire on the transition of modern video gaming versus the classics and how those have been essentially been forgotten by the younger crowd. And they're angry at us. I think that's more interesting already than what we got about aliens. Like,
well, there was a scene in a hangar where I think Michelle Monaghan's kid is playing, I think it's Last of Us.
It's something like that, yeah.
And Sandler was talking about, in the old games you have to remember patterns, you have to remember where the bosses and the enemies were coming and everything like that. But now in these new games, it's just I gotta survive, I gotta kill everything, make sure I don't die.
And I wanted more of that, because that was a good scene too. I really wanted more of that, because I thought it had something interesting to say. And at the same time, this whole film starts off in the 80s with this, flashback scene of, Adam Sandler and his friends as young kids, which I don't know why a lot of Adam Sandler films have to start out that way. I mean, you're not sympathizing with these kids. They're all jerks. But at the same time, this film needed more 80s nostalgia, I think. And that's why I love that scene with Centipede, where you've got Working for the Weekend playing in the background. It needed more things like that to be nostalgic for, and that it just didn't have. It's a great concept that is treated in such a superficial way. And
you see, and the thing with the concept that you're talking about, Brendan, in terms of the aliens, I can completely see your point, and I probably do agree. The one thing about it is, I do find it very interesting, the idea that we send all this information out into space in case we ever come into contact with aliens, and then let's say we do, but then they reinterpret that as a state of war, is a funny concept in itself.
That is pretty good.
That is good, and the short film it's based off of was that, and apparently it's pretty good, but I haven't seen it, so I don't know. So the concept, I think, is intriguing, but they do waste it. I mean, from beginning to end, it's just throwing all these characters that we know without really explaining hardly anything. And when you're talking about the 80s nostalgia, Brendan, I completely agree with that, because while we do see them play the video games as kids, so we get the sense of how good they are at them, but when we transition to when they're older, there's not a single time between the transition to Adam Sandler essentially teaching these soldiers how to play these games. We don't even see him playing video games. He acknowledges it like one other time, but how do we know that in that time he's still as good as he was when he was a kid? Like, we're supposed to take the movie's word for it. And then they introduce this incredibly forced, makes me want to throw up love romance in the middle of this that was absolutely absurd.
Oh, but that's the Sandler formula, right? Slobs get with the hot girls.
Yeah, why? Oh my! I feel so bad for Michelle Monaghan.
I know,
here.
me
She
too.
deserves better.
Yeah,
No, you know what? Honestly, thank God for Michelle Monaghan, because she keeps the film grounded. And that's the thing, like, I want to say about Sandler is that he's not a doofus in this. Is that he's not as, like, the usual, like, Sandler, oh, look, her shampoo is better, and all that nonsense, right? Conditioner is better.
Sure.
I hate that movie. I hate Billy Madison. I don't know why it's there. But thank God for Michelle Monaghan, is that you can see that the way Sandler and Michelle interact with each other, that Sandler doesn't go beyond that. He keeps it grounded, which is good, because it's not annoying. Josh Gad is annoying, and Dinklage is annoying later on.
Oh my God, two great actors.
And you know what? I would even say that Kevin James is not bad. He doesn't become like the Three Stooges version of himself, like in Paul Blart. He's kind of grounded as well. So Sandler and James are very grounded in this film. So, which is good.
And I think I would have liked Kevin James. The character that he plays is fine, but I think I would have liked him if he didn't play the freaking president of the United States.
I agree. I couldn't buy it at all.
I understand the joke there. I understand that alone is a joke.
Yeah.
But it wasn't funny. I just didn't find that joke funny, and that's where it didn't work for me. But you're right, Steve, that the character of Kevin James here isn't as doofus-esque, and even Adam Sandler for that regard as well. They're definitely, I guess you could say they have more intelligence, but I still didn't find them funny, unfortunately, and that's a problem for this film. It really is.
Like, I like the joke where Adam Sandler is talking to Kevin James's character, and there's a big crowd around or whatever, and he mentions something about taking the libraries away. Like, that was
pretty funny.
That was really funny, and I wish they would have done more with that if you're going to have the gag, but they don't, and instead they bring in this British Prime Minister or whatever, and maybe that'll make some people laugh. I just found it more goofy than anything. It just added to the nonsense that was happening in front of me anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe that was the point, but I will agree with you, Steve, about Michelle Monaghan. I mean, she is grounded and probably the best one here, but at the same time, I just don't feel like she really has much to do other than be the love interest and to make these gadgets that she apparently made in 3 seconds that happens all off screen, and we have no idea how that happened. But and I can understand this wanting to just be a movie where you're supposed to shut off for 2 hours and just enjoy it, but it's hard to do that when the logic is so out the window that you don't give me a chance to enjoy it, and the pacing is ridiculous in this movie. It is so stupid.
Yes, I agree totally. They go from A to C in this entire film. There is no B in this film.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good point. Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
But I think that's probably just to making sure that we give us a 90-minute summer popcorn film. Give us something 90 minutes that people go in, enjoy. Okay, that was good. I get out. So that's probably the reason why.
Yeah, and I could see that point. I just wish I was able to go along with that, and I couldn't, unfortunately. But before we get to, I guess, any potential final thoughts here, I want to bring up a question, and this is really the biggest problem I ultimately had with this film, and I want to kind of get your thoughts, and then we can go into final thoughts here. But who was this movie made for? Who is the target audience for this? And I still do not know the answer. And I think that's my biggest problem with a film like this. And I don't know if you guys have any idea who the target audience for this film even is, because I don't even think the film knows.
I think it's. I think we can all agree that Sandler, no matter what, he does have his audience. He does have his people. He does have his crowd that go in and see his movies. Mm-hmm. I think this is bringing in a high concept like this, and also bringing, say, a director like Chris Columbus and some of the actors in here, and even the way that Pixels is, I would say, is not as offensive. It's not as a bigger atrocity than most Sandler films. Mm-hmm. I think it's a Sandler film. It's definitely a Sandler and Happy Madison production, but masked in a way that it can attract people that are not used to the Sandler formula, or who are not who will say, you know what, this looks okay, I'll give it a chance, I'll give it a shot. Because there are a lot of Sandler tropes in it, like, say, the slobs going with the hot girl, with a love interest, and some of the things, maybe like the big doofus, some of the jokes, like the Josh gag, and and all his things. So there is the Sandler formula, but it's just masked, and it has this coding of something that can track other people to say, you know what, I will give this Sandler film a chance.
And I think that's an interesting point, and I can rebuttal off of that. I don't know if you have anything to add first, JD.
Well, and I think that's why, going back to what we were saying earlier, Steve, about people's preconceived notions about Adam Sandler kind of drives me crazy, or even Michael Bay, because, I had to argue the same thing when Pain and Gain came out, because I quite like that movie, but no one gave it a chance because they hate Michael Bay. And the thing with this movie is, the reason this movie is terrible for me has nothing to do with Adam Sandler. I think as an actor, especially of all of the goofballs in this movie, he delivers the best jokes. I quite enjoyed that one with the president, as I was saying, or the one where he goes in the war room. Now, the cliched love story, that could have been got out, but even in that, he's still delivering lines that are funny. And when we get to the third act, I like that his character is a little serious, and there is those ideas of kind of embracing, that just pretend to be a real person, and and all that sort of stuff, and instead of manipulating or predicting the formula or whatever. Adam Sandler is not the problem with this movie. I think a lot of the problem relies in the over-the-top goofiness from Peter Dinklage and Josh Gad specifically, but even more so the writing. The screenplay by Tim Herlihy and Timothy Dowling is god-awful. It is so atrocious. It's offensively bad. It wastes a premise that I think is really, really cool and really interesting, but the screenplay is so awful. It's probably the worst I've seen this year, and to me, that is the problem, is the writing. Because even from a direction standpoint, I think the visuals are really good.
I agree.
The visuals are fantastic. You can tell they spent a lot of money on that. And even those action sequences you were talking about with Pac-Man and Centipede, like, all of that is fantastic. Or even the Donkey Kong at the end, from a visual standpoint, it's really good. Yeah. That is not the problem. But the screenwriting is so bad, and the characters are such a caricature. And they play on those ideas of nerdom and geekdom that doesn't even apply to today. It wants to be in the 80s, but it doesn't make sense when it's happening right now. It was so bad, and that's the problem. Adam Sandler is not the problem. So anyone that is talking about that, and maybe as a producer and as a production company, maybe he is to blame to some degree, but when I look at this film, he's the least of my worries.
And I agree with you, JD. It's the script that's the problem here. And you mentioned something about the film kind of wanting to be in the 80s, and I said there wasn't enough 80s nostalgia. And that goes along with my question that I brought up about who this movie is really for and who its target audience is, because ideally you would think it's those of us who grew up with these games in the 80s who want to see it brought back in such a way.
Sure.
But in reality, I mean, how do you know these people are also fans of Adam Sandler? You really don't.
Yeah.
So that's one problem. The other problem is that this movie is essentially marketed for kids, and even the humor and the jokes in this film, and even the nature of violence in this film, I'm surprised that the movie itself got a PG-13 rating, because this is really a movie for humor-wise. I think it's for 10-year-olds. And I think people or kids under the age of 13 can easily go see this movie, at least for the most part. But they're at least conceptually, I think they could. And there were a lot of kids in the theater. There were a lot of kids in the theater that went to see this. Yeah. But the thing is, a lot of these kids probably didn't grow up with these games. So what are they being marketed for? But at the same time, and I want to backtrack a bit, because I said that this movie didn't need to be PG-13. There is language in this film that warrants it as a PG-13. I think Adam Sandler spurs out the F word at one point in this film. And I'm thinking, like, I think that the writers don't know who they're making this film for.
Yeah.
And that
is all over the place. Yeah.
That's a huge, huge problem. And they had a concept, and they didn't know how to run with it. And maybe my hatred for this film is a bit from the disappointment that they wasted such a good concept. But, I mean, just what we have script-wise is an atrocity. It's to the point that I think this movie deserves a remake already. I'd say remake this. Bring it back next year with, and even utilize the same shot-for-shot action sequences. I don't care, because those are good. But give us a good movie. Give us a good story. And
give it to Phil Lord and Chris Miller.
they would be perfect for this.
Yes.
Absolutely perfect. And if this were like in the tradition of the Lego movie, you have another classic here.
Absolutely.
They would be able to.
I agree.
Yeah.
The concept is fascinating enough that you could easily remake this, like get it going right now, and in 2 years I'd be willing to watch it again if taking a lot more seriously.
Yeah, I completely agree. But, we definitely ranted a little bit on this, but let's, just for the sake of time, let's get to any initial final thoughts that you may have. And do you have a grade that you want to give this, Steve?
Yeah, it's definitely a C-.
Mm-hmm.
It's as I mentioned, it is one of the better Sandler films in his catalog of art. And that's a high concept film because, as you mentioned, the concept is fantastic. It's great. I want to play Pixels the game because that sounds more fun than watching.
I would agree.
Yeah, sure.
So as a concept, it's okay. It's not bad. If you do find a way to see it, I think you'll know that there are a lot of misses, but there are a lot of good points, and it's okay. It's not bad. It's not the atrocity which everyone is saying. But the end credits, fantastic.
Oh yeah, in fact, I'd say if you're gonna go see this movie, go in like an hour and a half late just so you can see the end credits.
Yeah.
How about you, JD? What final thoughts do you have?
As far as final thoughts, I mean, I think we've said a lot, but I want to say to really cap off this experience for me and how much I was just not liking it was at the end where, they kind of, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but I don't give a shit at this point. But at the end, after they kind of win the day, so to speak, and they get to keep Cuber as kind of like a trophy, I guess, right? And Josh Gad's character is whining and bitching and moaning because he didn't get to keep his video game girlfriend that he was stalkerishly in love with. And then Cuber transforms into this girl. I literally said, this movie. I was so pissed. I was like, why? That was completely and utterly unnecessary and so stupid and so unearned. Oh, I hated that about this movie.
But the thing is, I knew it was going to happen. I knew that was going to happen even before Josh Gad started bitching and moaning like that.
God,
JD,
I know.
That's the love of his life, JD.
The love of his.
He spent his entire 38 years on this planet loving and for this one girl, effectively making a shrine for her, idolizing this girl. I mean, come on. If I got a chance to meet Christina Applegate, I would give everything to her because Kelly Bundy is still my crush.
Yeah,
come on.
Look, okay, and on paper, sure, I'll give it to him. In execution, that was not earned, and it was so stupid. And if anything, it also f***ed over Kubert, who, had some levity to the film, and he was fine. Like,
it's kind of cute,
yeah, exactly. Why'd you have to screw him over? No. I was not on board with that. I know. Here's the thing, Steve. If she would have just dropped from the sky and was standing next to Kubert, I would have been fine with it. But
that's what I actually thought was going to happen when I knew she was going to come back in some way.
Exactly. She's going to show up. But when they transform Kubert into her, I'm not on board with that. No. So for me, a generous D+.
A generous D+. If I had a nickel for every time I heard that, I wouldn't waste it on this movie's video game.
Yes.
But, oh my God, I completely agree with you, JD. I would, just for my grade specifically, I would give this probably around a D+ as well, and that is also being generous, and that's mostly because of two great scenes, and that's the centipede battle that happens first, and then the Pac-Man battle, which I think were very well done. But it reminds me of what this movie needed, and I think, like I said, it needed some more 80s nostalgia. I think it needed a killer soundtrack. It needed someone who's going to compose a musical score that recycled themes from these games and actually made them made them recognizable. It needed stuff like that, and they tried to do that again with a Donkey Kong sequence, and they play some weird variation of Queen's "We Will Rock You."
Yeah,
but that's again another reason that they don't understand the source material or don't understand their audience, because that's not an 80s song. That's not, I mean, it was popular in the 80s, but it doesn't scream 80s era for me. That song came out in 1977. And I'm just biased because I'm a huge Queen fan. But it's not a song that I see and I think of like 80s. I think of Michael Jackson. I think of Motley Crue. I think, Loverboy and like those kind of groups. It was Survivor, Eye of the Tiger. That's what I think of with the 80s. But it was such a wasted opportunity. It really was. And on top of that, just judging the film as it was and not what I wanted it to be, it's not funny. It's not funny at all. And
I completely agree.
Yeah, so people, listen to the critics. Don't see it.
Yes.
Don't see it.
Yes.
Oh no, Sandman needs more money. Come on.
Sandman
needs
more money.
You know, he does say a lot of times that he's just doing these films to get vacations out of this, right?
Yeah, and people are willing to give him that vacation because him and Kevin James make money, and I have no idea how.
And that's all Grown Ups was. In fact, I think that's all Just Go With It was. I mean, what Just Go With It, wasn't that in Hawaii or something like that? I think he's even said that he only did that film so he can get a trip out of Hawaii.
Yeah, crazy. Anyway,
for the sake of us not raining anymore, that'll do it for our review of Pixels.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, Pixels.
And if you want, leave a comment on our Facebook page or Twitter. Let us know what you think of Pixels. We would absolutely love to hear from you. And before we get out of here, Steve, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me here, man. And if you need someone to fill in, hey, give me a shot.
Absolutely. Once again,
hey, yeah, you hate Notre Dame, so you're welcome.
Exactly.
Yeah. Tell us once again where we can find you on the internet.
Sure. The main Twitter handle is @WastedTheShow. Go to Facebook, facebook.com/WastedShow. And those are the primary two things. We got some announcements as to what we will do with Wasted. And yeah, just give us a like, give us a follow.
Yeah.
I'm tweeting constantly about films and about my boy Sandler. So
there you go. Yeah, definitely go give Steve a follow. Really, really fun to talk to. On Twitter, we certainly engage quite a bit. So definitely go and check out his stuff. And on that note, that should do it for this week's show. Again, just a friendly reminder to like us on Facebook and Twitter, but also on Google Plus and YouTube. Just search InSession Film and you'll find us there. We also respond to every piece of email that we get, so email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. And of course, sign up for our monthly newsletter. You can do that on Facebook by clicking the newsletter tab or on our site at InSessionFilm.com/newsletter.
And for more thoughts on the films that we watch, you can check us out on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm. You can also find us at LostAtHomePodcast.com, our good friends there who will also feature our shows and reviews there every week. We appreciate some help there as well. But that's another way you can find us right there at LostAtHomePodcast.com. Also, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes and on Stitcher. And while you are on iTunes, you can leave us a review and a comment there. We'd appreciate some feedback there as well. And lastly, you can check out our Listen Now page, which is on our website at InSessionFilm.com/listen-now.
And the InSession Film Podcast is supported by our super awesome listeners like you. Once again, if you want to help us, just go to our website at InSessionFilm.com. You can click on that bonus content tab on our main menu to hear that for just a small donation of 99 cents. You can check out the InSession Film store or just go to InSessionFilm.com/donate. And you'll see a bunch of information there and how you can help us. One thing that I would highly recommend is checking out our mobile app where you can hear everything we do under one roof for just a one-time fee of $1.99. You can find the app on the Amazon Market for Android devices, the Windows 8 phone store for Windows devices, and the Podcast Box app for iOS devices. And again, all those details are on the site at InSessionFilm.com/apps. And we did get some feedback over the last week of a few people that actually got our app pretty recently, so thanks to everybody that has reached out to us about that and getting that out. Hopefully you enjoy it. So, on that note, Brendan, what are we doing next week on the show?
So next week, should you choose to listen to our review, I hope you guys saw what I did there.
Yes, good work.
We will be going rogue and talking about the latest installment in the Mission Impossible franchise with Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation, which I told you, JD, I'm a fan of this saga, and I'm very excited for this film, but I got a sneak peek at some of the early reviews after the embargo was just lifted, and we're hearing some good things. So I'm hearing some good initial things.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I'm going to try and stay away and let the embargo just do its own thing, because I don't want to know too much going in. But I'm really looking forward to this one. And on that note, since the Mission Impossible film came out in the mid-90s, for our top 3, we're going to be doing our top 3 favorite action films from the 90s. We've already done this sort of with our review of Mad Max Fury Road. We did our top 3 favorite action films of the 80s, but we figured this time let's honor the other decade. Let's honor what came after that, as there's a lot of great films to choose from, and I look forward to that discussion as well. And for our discussion segment, I was recently inspired by, I was on the IMDb boards a couple weeks ago, and you had some folks trying to do a fight between Ethan Hunt versus James Bond and who was better. So
Okay.
let's try. I figure it'd be nice to kind of revisit the In-Session Film Showdown segment and kind of pin Ethan Hunt against James Bond, if you will, and really kind of look at the film franchises together and just kind of put the two together. And we'll put some more rules out later, but we'll see which one we think would come out on top. But I think it'll be a good fun discussion on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly look forward to it, especially after what you told me about the early reviews. I'm pretty excited to check out that film.
I want to stay away, but it's I can't look away. It was like the bad stuff in Pixels. I just couldn't look away now.
You can help yourself, yeah. All right, well, on that note, before we get out of here, Steve, any final thoughts on anything before we leave today?
Okay, final thoughts is a phrase from a film and TV series. Clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose.
Sounds good. I like it. All right, what about you, Brendan? Any final thoughts?
Don't see Pixels.
Boo, boo, boo.
Go an hour and a half late and watch the end credits.
Yeah, I would echo those sentiments. I will.
Or don't pay to see Pixels.
Or you can do
see
that,
it, but don't pay to see it.
Don't pay to see it. Yeah.
Not that I condone sneaking in, but for this film, you can do that. I don't care.
How about for my final thoughts? Do go see Warrior, though.
Oh,
Amazing
yeah, if you
movie.
haven't, yeah.
So
easily the best film that we've talked about all in this entire show, I would say.
Absolutely. And it's crazy because, like, I'm not a huge boxing or MMA fan by any means. And for whatever, for a lot of reasons, I love that movie. And really because it has, the heart of it has nothing to do with fighting or MMA or anything like that. So.
Right.
Yeah. So good. Anyway, on that note, thanks everybody for listening. Thanks, Steve, for joining us once again. We can see you guys next week from Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. We'll see you guys next time on the InSession Film Podcast. And what I liked about Southpaw, too, is I love how he kind of scaled back his style, because I thought that was some of the worst parts of The Equalizer, because the story there the story there is as conventional as anything else there, too, and it works as a fun action movie, but his style is ridiculous. Like, plays with the camera, and it's egregious. It just stop. And that's what I was reminded of, that last scene where the antagonist boxer falls to the ground in slow motion like that with everything. It's like, you Fuqua, that's what I hated about your last movie. Just let him fall down. God damn it.
Yeah. Equalizer is basically to reinforce the fact that, yes, Denzel is a badass. We get it. But
exactly.
2 hours of it. Holy shit.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Goodness.
Oh, geez. I forgot Fuqua also directed Shooter with Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah.
Oh, God. That's one of the worst films I've ever seen.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
What trash.
Yeah,
oh, my
bad.
God. I remember my mom texted me when that was on AMC, I guess, one day saying, "Brendan, have you seen this movie? It's so good." I was like, "Mom, I don't know you anymore."
On that note, for the entire version of our podcast, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes or on Stitcher, or check us out online at InSessionFilm.com.